Hey everybody, welcome back to Terminus, the Disco Elysium of extreme metal podcasts. I am the death metal guy, aka I know I was supposed to headline tonight, but please let me open so I can just go home.
And I am the black metal guy, aka Orbmaster Corneus, Dragon Wizard.
Are orbs just becoming like the Terminus thing? You know, esoteric orb metal forever?
Orbs, swords, there's something for everyone.
Orbs, swords, and motorcycles. That's the name of our fucking book. Orbs, swords, and motorcycles.
It has to be, orbs it's got to ring off the tongue. Swords, orbs, and motorcycles.
Swords, orbs, and motorcycles. That works, man.
Yeah,
I mean, that
works.
combines our three favorite things, basically.
Does either of us, do you own a motorcycle?
No, God. No,
neither do I. No.
That's a death trap. My mom always told me they were dangerous, so...
Yeah, it's, I know, my buddy got one, and, he was riding it in a city where it was maybe not the best, it was fucking L.A., right? So within 2 years, he was like, okay, that's my second hospital visit from this. I think I'm done.
I can't imagine, like, having a motorcycle...
I think
like
it's
a motorcycle primary vehicle in an urban area. Like, why would you do that to yourself?
Yeah, I think it's a very cool thing to do if you really love motorcycles. Other than that, may not be worth it.
I'll leave my biking to the devil. Thank you very much. He's much faster than me.
Anyway.
Oh shit, man. Okay, we got a show to do. All right, our last show before our end of year episode, actually. Should probably let people know that. Yeah, this time our end of year episode is going to come out right before Christmas. Possibly like on Christmas, depending on when I upload it. But yeah,
and depending on whether you're naughty or nice. I mean, our listeners, that is. If they are insufficiently naughty, Terminus won't come out till New Year's.
Yeah, maybe that's what I should do. Maybe I should hold it off so that the gap of our winter break isn't as painful for all of our loyal listeners. Oh God! All right, what are we doing? You have some like shout outs, or do we want to go to your first section, or what's your plan?
Oh, we got some house. I mean,
oh yeah, well
you were going to do some stuff.
I've forgotten the fucking housekeeping so many goddamn times now. Yeah, so like I've forgotten to do on the last couple episodes. I should probably do it on the last real episode of the year. Social media, me on Facebook at Terminus Podcast, and the Black Metal Guy on Instagram at Terminus Extreme Metal. And then also, if you really want to participate, feel free to help us out over on Patreon or Subscribestar. $3 and up gets you access to all of the Terminus Prime bonus episodes. $5 and up gets you access to the Terminus Black Circle, our private Discord server that is primarily orb discussion, at least 60% by volume. The orb tips and tricks, esoteric orb walkthroughs, that kind of thing. And then, $10 and up gets you voting privileges to start picking the content of our bonus episodes, at least our main bonus episodes. The next one of which is a major doing, but will be coming out relatively soon. We'll
have more time
and read.
We'll have more time to do it over winter break.
It will take a lot of research. It is going to be a very important one for us. So thank you all for your patience as we try to figure it out. But you were the one pointing out in the notes, and you were talking to me the other day that we've got this like big surge of new listeners, right?
Yeah, who are you people?
It's like we're seeing all these numbers tick up with like all these people, like all these new listeners coming in, and like a really weirdly large number of people, isn't it? Aren't we up like a fucking 100%? Haven't we basically doubled or something?
It's been, last month was our biggest growth in a year, and this month seems to be growing at the same rate, if not more. It'll slow down a little for break, but like between this episode and the next, we're on track for 1,500 downloads in a month, right? And it's pretty damn good considering where we started out.
For an esoteric metal ritual podcast like this one, I can't complain. But with that being said, guys, all you new guys that are listening to this wherever, leave fucking comments. We respond to all of them. Send us emails. Send us a lock of your hair. Take pictures of our houses on Google Maps and send it to us in the mail. All that kind of thing. We would love to hear more from you guys.
Speaking of fan interaction, I've been meaning to do this. You know how we were talking about how that that Anti song was literally about the devil's motorcycle?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we got a guy wrote us with the subject line, "The devil rides with me." He says, "So two things. The V8 reference in the lyrics doesn't jive with motorcycles, as a vast majority are 2 or 4 cylinder. As to the mystery of counting off 1 through 8 out of sequence, it may be a reference to the firing order of the cylinders of a V8, which varies depending on the motor. Just saying."
No, yeah, I saw that, and one of the guys from Anti did confirm that it was about... Yes. It's an old Chevy firing sequence for old V8 Chevys.
But just what a strange mix of just sort of like car fixin' Chad total autismo. It's just like, I mean, salute to you, sir. That is the true Terminator spirit.
If there was a metal podcast where not only did someone have that knowledge, but was intense enough about it to need to inform us, it would absolutely be Terminus.
It means, yes. Thank you for sending that. Shit like, I forgot to reply, but shit like that means we're doing something right.
We love that, dude.
Yeah. Anything else? I mean, also, I guess, like, there isn't been anything like new shit, like, we're not, like, doing any more promos. So I think people have been talking to their friends. So if you have told your friends about the show, if you've put your cultural capital on the line by associating yourselves with us, and your friends have, looked up the show and decided that it appears to be real, and they don't mock you, then thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. I mean, we were moving from strength to strength in our obscure metal podcast a year and a half in. So, oh man, it's good times. But you've got something for our intro section, our weird kind of floating section.
Yeah. So we've got a submission. This is from Brandon Corsair of Dragcar, Azath, and Nameless Grave Records, to name a few. We reviewed the new Dragcar last year. And
he reviewed the first Azath like early in the show's run.
We did, didn't we? I couldn't remember whether we covered that or not.
It was like single-digit episodes.
That's right, because I was listening to that a ton that spring. Yeah, that's right. I remember, because I was like, this is awesome, it has a dragon on the cover, and you were like, it sounds like Autopsy. And I was like, oh, I don't know how Autopsy sounds, and that was the review. So this is a somewhat different thing, although very much he's got an aesthetic, right? And this hangs together with those. It's half of a split with a band called Ezra Brooks, and it's Visions of Esoteric Splendor by Serpent Rider. This is coming out he's doing the digital for his half on Nameless Grave, and the physical is out now on CD and LP on No Remorse Records. This lineup also features Andrew Lee, his frequent collaborator from Azath, and also the guy who plays guitar in Dragcar, and a new female vocalist. So they are doing... Generically, this is Epic Doom. Epic Doom is a bit of a misnomer, because it is... Well, we'll get into that in a second, why that might be a misnomer. But, it all revolves... It, in a sense, is like basically founded on one band, Solstice, right, from England. And interestingly, Solstice themselves have moved to a female vocalist recently. There's not any new original songs with her yet. But so this is moving weirdly in tandem with them in an interesting way. But let's check out the... I'll run a couple tracks past you and you see what you think. This one is Mask of the Wolf. So that's the lead-off single. And we'll just start at the beginning. What do you make of that, dude?
I mean, I like it, although I'm trying to figure what makes this Doom.
Yeah, I mean that's the question, right? I mean,
it sounds like echoey NWOBHM to me, you know,
or like speed metal, right? I mean,
really reverb-drenched speed metal.
Yeah, like the sort of half pedal point riffs with kind of half palm mutes, epic Dorian scale melodies of the kind that Corsair favors and other projects, right?
I mean, honestly, it would fit in alongside a lot of the stuff of that, like, NWOTHM scene pretty easily.
You could say this is just heavy metal, and I think in some places they label it a heavy metal band.
Yeah, I do like it. There's certain, like, aesthetic choices that I find interesting. The sort of, like... I get the, like, vague Doom quality, because, like, the production, which is kind of like a Brandon Corsair thing, within this context almost reminds me of, like, Pagan Altar. It's, like, a little bit deliberately quiet.
I hear that for sure, yeah.
I kind of like in this context, just because it's a very different kind of sound quality than you usually hear from this kind of thing. But that also extends to this woman's vocal performance,
yes.
which is you can hear her kind of open up and soar melodically periodically, but a lot of it's kind of like more kind of clipped delivery and a little bit quiet in the production. It's an interesting vibe. I can see how this has a kind of 70s Doom aesthetic, even though the actual material being played is pretty far from that.
Yeah, that's cool. So yeah, the whole thing about the whole thing about Epic Doom is that, like, you know, New Dark Age has fast parts on it, and everyone likes the fast parts. right? And so it's good to just acknowledge that we all like the fast parts, right? Cromlech does that well too, right? They play some stuff that's just like really fast. This is quite. I mean, Solstice never plays this fast. Usually they're just sort of barreling 6/8 things. But there are related bands in that scene who kick it up more. Also, Rich Walker's other sort of side project with the guy from Twisted Tower Dire, Ison Tor, has more, is basically like this. It's sort of just armor-plated heavy metal.
Yeah.
And so, like, what is Epic Doom? Really, it's a vibe. And also, as music, it's basically like, I mean, stuff like Candlemass and Pagan Altar are important, but like Manowar and Bathory are just as important.
I mean, Epic Doom. Anything with the word epic is a Rorschach test for the listener.
Yeah. I mean, and I think we've said on this show before. I've talked about it with Cromlech. It's like epic. It's what it kind of means is just heavy metal is extreme metal.
Yeah,
it's just,
I can get that.
So this has that. A thing I was thinking is, there's always this thing where I listen to things with headphones for the first time on the show because I just, other than that, I just kind of blast them on speakers. The two-channel guitar thing is really good here. So they have Andrew playing bass and drums, and then there's dedicated rhythm and lead guitar. And a lot of the parts are sort of doubled, but you can kind of hear them chasing each other and breaking off from each other in cool ways. That it's not like full-on Iron Maiden tandem melodies, but I think it sounds good. But the faint sound is definitely something I noticed. Yeah, part of that is giving it that esoteric or cryptic vibe. Makes it more ancient. I think boosting the vocals would be good. And it might be partly a matter of pushing them forward in the mix and partly a matter of the performance. Like, yeah, the parts where she goes full-on heavy metal soaring, good, right? It's a fuller voice, right? So she's like committing more, right? And there's just more power being used.
I mean, I can kind of see it either way because on one hand, yeah, it does feel like the more open soaring parts on her vocals they fit better, but I like the kind of unique quality of the more chirping, softer stuff.
Oh, I'm not saying keep that. I'm saying keep the soaring parts, but the verse parts, right, that are more clipped, you need to figure out what to do with them. Like, should they be more like barked, like the Sacrilege vocals? Right, right. Sacrilege UK, the crust band that has sort of aggressive female vocals, or should they be like? Could you make them even more ethereal? I think right now it's a little bit.
It's a little bit in between.
Not a little neither here nor there. Right. It should be more sort of clipped and aggro, more shouty, or more, even more like more wispy. Right.
Yeah. Well, let's hear.
Yeah.
Well, let's hear another song because I want to see if this is like an outlier track or if this is comparable to the rest of it.
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, let's believe Echidna is still fairly up tempo, at least in a lot of it. But let's go to the Wretch. That title should be. Some people might remember that seems like a Gates of Slumber homage. Gates of Slumber is a band you could call Epic Doom. Those guys were sick. Do you remember them?
Oh, only very vaguely. I know
you would have liked them.
It's been a lot of years.
Yeah, sort of profoundly soulful. I think you would have found the Crowbar spirit in it. Imagine Crowbar, sort of like somber, tough working class Doom. Just imagine the aesthetic is more Conan the Barbarian.
Oh, that sounds good. Yeah.
It's really good. We should revisit them. But so this might be a Gates of. I'm guessing they're familiar with the Gates of Slumber, so it might be an homage. It's a good title, and I pulled this sample from towards the back end. We'll be coming out of a more up-tempo midsection, but here you get some more epic doomy stuff happening. Could you feel the Cyclopean scapes unfold?
It definitely. I get more of the Doom vibe there. I mean, there's obviously that big kind of mid to late 70s Doom riff that pops up in the middle of that sample, makes it a lot clearer. That really, again, I think that as far as like very old classic Doom stuff, Pagan Altar is probably the most immediate reference. So I do like that a lot. I guess between these two samples, if there's a complaint that I have about this music, it's well executed, but the solos can be a little bit much. Like, a lot of this is so far, and I gotta listen to the whole thing, but it does feel like verse, solo, different verse, solo. It feels like a lot of this is setups for the lead guitar, and it's certainly well executed and narrative lead guitar. I just wish it was a little bit more spiced up structurally.
Word. Yeah, so, yeah, also about that part, I thought, yeah, the big Doom riff, I thought that's the only thing that I think on this sounds specifically solsticey to me, or that really stands out to me as solsticey in particular, aside from the fact that this all is, right, in some way. But like, what's cool about that one is that it has the sort of arcing Dorian scale noble folk melody thing that is characteristic of the genre, and then it dives into a couple weird chromatic turns as it descends. Not dissonant, just like unusually placed notes that just
the dissonant part of blues, you know?
Something, yeah, very close to dissonant blues intervals, or even just intervals that technically aren't dissonant. They're just unexpected in the scale. And that's something that Rich Walker does really well in, especially in the slower, bendier stuff. There's unusual interval choice that isn't just like, let's hit a Black Sabbath tritone, or let's do sawing black, let's do Celtic Frost crushing stuff, right? You can hear Celtic Frost hiding in some of those ideas and whatever, but it's not at all obvious. And so I think that's a good well-shaped riff with some nuance to it. Yeah, so another thing is this is since this is the debut? No, they've done a demo called Pour Forth Circuitous, which is a cool word. I do not know what it means. But this is the first official release. And on a splitter and EP like this, right, it shows the band looking for an angle, right? Clearly a lot of thought has been put into the lyrics, and it's especially important in music where the lyrics are relatively audible. And it seems like the lyrics sort of split into two different angles. I think one's more promising than the other. So, like, on that opening ripper, Mask of the Wolf, right? The lyrics are kind of like, weirdly, like the opposite of Hail and Kill. Right, you get sort of like, bestial men attack, glorious masks adorn their faces, they glory in misery, find power in pain, these conquerors of the world, blah, 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 right? Mask of wolf, tight on his face, insanity comes to him as easily as pride, born with a twisted heritage of conquest, right? So it's kind of like, it kind of inverts a lot of the, tropes of the genre. It seems like a critique of the heroic ethos, basically. And it seems kind of out of step with the whole Epic Doom vibe, which is rooted in, Man of War and Bathory and Solstice and stuff like that, right? You can hear my father was a wolf and a kinsman to the slain sworn to rise again, right? The power and dominion are taken by the will, by divine right, hail and kill, etc., right? Or a conqueror star shall rise again above this ravaged land, right? That's Eisentor. You can hear the difference. So it seems kind of at odds with the basic spirit of the music, in a weird way. However, the other thing is it comes off kind of, the resonance in all this stuff is sort of like the old Christian critiques of the prideful pagan conqueror, right?
Yeah.
Right, you are conquering and oppressing others. Truly, it is you who are enslaved to your base, your pride and your base desires. Right, And so, it's weird, and it's weird in epic doom. It's weird in music that sort of has this sort of pagan druid funeral pyre scene on the front, which is a cool cover. But then there's this other approach in the other two songs, which seems more like way more promising and also different from the usual epic doom tropes in some ways, right? The last two songs are fit together, and they kind of got this focus on nightside femininity. And, a lot of this music, right, is obviously, Manowar, the most extreme example of it, right? But is very sort of one-dimensional, deliberately one-dimensional Conan, right? Mm-hmm. Or in Solstice, you get kind of like, Solstice, maybe you get Angry Elf King, right? But these are like... These just look at a different side of that kind of pagan, barbaric universe, and they do it in a really doomed out way. So Echidna focuses on, the mate of Typhon. So these are sort of like anti-cosmic monsters in the Greek cosmogony, right? Sort of like not titans, but sort of beasts born of Earth that fight the gods, right? And Echidna and Typhon get trapped under a volcano or something. But Echidna, twisted in glory, serpentine but beautiful, mother of monsters, all alone in the dark. Silence surrounds, nothing but pain, all alone in the darkness and completely insane. Right? That's, right? Looking at this sort of like, the descriptions in the myths, right? They're supposed to be these grotesque, sinister creatures, right? But here, this kind of a sympathetic look at just this, mother of beasts sort of locked away under the earth, right? Mm-hmm. And in the last one, the Wretch is the one that I feel like that's the best one lyric-wise. That is, it's far out in a cool way. It's like, the story, it's like, in combat the woman destroyed, her frame reduced by acid, crawling foe victorious in her would-be death. The wretch forever, the torment eternal, betrayed by family, a body of vermin, gone is glory, replaced by the wretch. Alien body impossible to control, fists and nails that tear anything that draws close, etc. So the plot seems to be like, female warrior gets acid blasted by a verm and just like horribly mutilated and struck with a demonic curse. And, and it's about just like suffering through this horrible curse. And the end of it, it's got this affirmative note, right? It's, but with an iron will, the wretch can be overcome, the body can be reformed, and the glory can return, right? That's pretty cool. And that, or not just pretty cool, that's very cool. And it implies, the cool thing about that is that it implies a massive story beyond it.
Hail! This is Brandon from Cromlech, and you're listening to Terminus.
All right. So we are back from, God, were we just like shooting this shit for like a half hour at least?
Yeah, well, we're prepping. We're prepping for the end of the year. Yeah.
That's right. You mean the end of the world?
The same thing, Borther.
No. All right, yeah, no. So we were talking about year endless and shit, and basically just being complete assholes. It's 1 a.m. But this is we are back from doing that with a monumental work of pure black metal. This is Deiform by Funeral Mist, out now on Norma Evangelium Diaboli, right? That is the label headed by the guy from DSO. Or NoEvDia, you may have seen. I was kind of stumped for a record for this week. I was like, I had some pick, it didn't really work out. And then or I wasn't sure it would work out. And then I saw in my inbox, new Funeral Mist, and I was like, oh shit. So they did the surprise drop end of the year thing like Hate Forest did last year. But I think even more rapidly. Hate Forest had a promo track. I'm not sure this did. This is not a band that I listened to back in the day, but it's a band you listened to, and they were important, so I checked it out. And fuck, I like this a lot. And I think this will sets up a very interesting conversation about a lot of things, including something we've really has been one of our recurring subjects this year in particular, which is the legacy of orthodox black metal.
Yeah. I think it's been mentioned on this show, but of the primary wave of orthodox black metal in the 2000s, Funeral Mist is the one that I really connected with. I am a well-known disliker of most of the original wave of orthodox black metal, and I've come around a little bit more in recent years. I understand what they were going for a little bit more. I'm not going to say that I love any of it, but I definitely don't resent it in the way that I did back in the day. I was pretty strident about not liking Deathspell Omega and, associated acts.
So was I. I mean, and back in the day when you're young, you've got to be sort of in the trenches and a little bit narrow on purpose, right? I mean, there was a certain kind of person who wouldn't shut up about DSO, and Death Metal Guy and I both...
we hated that guy.
Yeah, we hated that. We hated that guy. Since then I've had... I've come to understand it a lot more. I do... I have respect for DSO now, and think there's a lot of interesting stuff there and some great riffs. Yeah. But however, I lumped in shit like Funeral Mist with that, right? Funeral Mist was like they were one of the more rockin' of these bands, right? It's like if you were Watain was the one that became big and commercial, right, and that everyone could pretty much pass a certain point where like, okay, those guys suck, or they've jumped the shark. DSO was the sort of
the flagship,
the mystic archmage of the scene, right? The kind of like artistic flagship. And Funeral Mist was the one that a bunch of my friends listened to, and that I'm sure I clicked on like 3 minutes of, and was like, no, it sounds like Marduk. And I mean, I loved Marduk, right? And also this guy Mortuus, or this guy who is Ariok in Funeral Mist, is Mortuus in Marduk. But I was a snotty kid. So tell us about what you made of Funeral Mist back in the day.
Well, back in the day, I've got some updated ideas, because actually, in anticipation of this review, on my commute home, I listened to Salvation, the first album, again, for the first time in many years. And it was interesting going back to it. There has to be kind of a discussion about Funeral Mist in general, because Funeral Mist was lumped into the orthodox scene. Particularly with the second record, Maranatha, which is kind of the one that everybody knows. A lot of people's understanding of Funeral Mist begins and ends with that record, which kind of makes sense because it's a great record.
Also, they didn't release one again for, I think,
another 9 years.
Yeah,
it was Hecatomb in 2018, which I still haven't heard. Now I want to check it out again.
Yeah.
So. But now, after listening to Salvation again, and listening to a bit of Maranatha, I mean, I think the last time I listened to Maranatha was probably just, like, a couple years ago, which probably sounds like a long time for a lot of people listening, but when you do shit like this show, that's like, ooh, that's a great rotation. You played it a couple years ago, it's got to be an important record. So, basically, Funeral Mist got lumped into the whole Orthodox scene, but a lot of people forget the fact that Funeral Mist's first demo was back in '95. I mean, it's basically second-wave black metal at its roots. So, Maranatha came out in 2009, which is honestly pretty far after the initial wave of Orthodox black metal coalescing around C Monumenta by DSO in 2004. The thing that I want to ask, especially after listening to Salvation again today, is honestly, was Funeral Mist ever really Orthodox black metal, or were they just part of blasting Swedish black metal? Because Salvation sounds like a very weird take on Marduk and Dark Funeral for a lot of it. Stripped down, minimal, odd, lots of samples, but still centered around fast blasting, tremolo riffs, and a pretty straightforward kind of delivery. Maranatha in 2009 expands upon that, with a more elaborate melodic palette, but is ultimately geared around the same ideas. And I think that this new album, Deiform, is still contiguous with the rest of Funeral Mist's work, but tweaked slightly. But not so much that it doesn't reflect sort of 2000s black metal. I think that's the important thing to remember. This sounds, in a lot of ways, like a 2000s black metal record. But now we're so far away from that kind of sound, it has very different connotations. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. So I think a big thing for me would be, this new record certainly is blasting Swedish black metal. Right? I mean, the connections to me, like, the connections to Marduk are way more evident than the connections to a lot of the stuff that gets associated with the Orthodox. And that's a thing to bring up in general that maybe neither of us is equipped to answer right now. But there really is... First of all, nobody uses the word Orthodox anymore. That's the thing I realized partly through this year.
We're old guys now.
We're the only people who use the word. And if you want to... but it's shaped the nowadays scene so much that's why we use the word. You have to understand where it came from, right? Now it's just Icelandic black metal, dissonant black death metal, ugh, right? The entire thing is really some gestures that DSO used sometimes and some kinds of chords that bands like Watain and a few others used sometimes, right? These kind of mayhemic, extra wonky mayhemic chords. That's become the whole of the thing. There's a difference between the Swedish and the French scene. And some of the other Swedish bands, Alframod was basically, I think, rumored to be like the founders of Orthodox BM per se. First one was in '98, Mysterion Tessenomias, and that basically is just mayhem worship, which kind of sets it off. But it's in that mayhemic vein, but it doesn't really sound anything like what we would associate it with it now. And later Offermod, so it just sounds very Swedish in some ways. It was like Dissection. I don't, there's like, you were talking about like Ondskapt, I don't know them.
I love Ondskapt, yeah.
Yeah. So, and does that sound like skronky, dissonant, sort of...
Ondskapt, a little bit. I mean, they use like spooky Orthodox arpeggios, but it's like... Imagine like mid-paced stompy Funeral Mist, and you have an idea.
Yeah. And this is the thing, right? The term meant a lot of different, a family resemblance of things. I mean, I guess a band that is definitely Orthodox BM and that we both love is Aosoth, right?
Yeah, Aosoth is...
And that has all the characteristics that became typical of it in later stuff. But so there is a question about what did the term mean? What was counted there? Let's listen to your sample of the old stuff and give the people a listen, because I don't, if I've ever heard this, I haven't heard it in 10 years or more.
Yeah. Well, so let's listen to a later track off Maranatha. This is called Living Temples. We're just going to play the first couple minutes of that track. And there's a distinction that occurs, kind of a difference between this album and Maranatha, as well as Maranatha and the rest of Orthodox black metal, which is...
Oh, and by this album you mean like this new one, Deiform.
Yes.
Yeah. Difference between Deiform... We went very music history very fast.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to listen to something from Maranatha to compare it to the new record.
We're going to compare it to the new record as well as the rest of Orthodox black metal, because the thing is, like I'm saying, maybe Funeral Mist wasn't really Orthodox in the way we think of it. But Maranatha is a wonderful record because it's still got the blasting Swedish quality, but there's this subtle melodic undercurrent of like almost DSBM at times, melodies that you could scan as either triumphant or tragic depending on the mood you listen to it in. It's got a very distinct atmosphere despite how aggressive it is. So this will be good this is the legendary Funeral Mist album. Let's compare it to what we're hearing today.
Why have you been hiding that from me?
I haven't been hiding it. I've been talking about this album for 10 fucking years, dude.
Jeez.
It's a really good record. And the thing that makes it so distinct amongst, if we're saying it's part of Orthodox, its contemporaries, is this intense subtlety in the way he arranges guitar phrases. So the dominant phrase throughout that song is that skronky, like 1-2, that dun dan dun dan dun dan.
Yeah, 1-5, yeah.
Yeah, basically perpetually played throughout that song.
He's doing like a sweep. It's like or like whatever you're calling it. It's like a glissando thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then you'll hear all these interesting phrases if you concentrate, different kind of shapings of the riff underneath it. And some are more aggressive and mardic, some are more tragic and sad. But they're all bound together with that constant 1-5 sweep over and over again. So you get this interesting blend of moods. I always considered Maranatha secretly this very sad record. Despite all the bombast and the extremity of it, there's this undercurrent of like unease and sorrow to it that I thought was really interesting. You know, I can pick up on it a little bit better now and really understand the technique, but even back then I heard something about that record that was like, there's a little bit more of like a personal relationship in this music. Not to say it doesn't exist in Orthodox black metal, but it's more readily apparent to me. There is a person behind this who is connecting
Sort of
with this.
Obsessive one-man project.
Yeah, exactly. Well, now that we've heard that, that's kind of the reference point. How do you feel that relates to Deiform here?
Well, so yeah, in terms of, is it Orthodox or not? I think I'm just going to go with like, yeah, because people said it was, but also I think what it really sounds like is Antaeus. They're just, the whole scene was always crosstalk between France and Sweden, basically. And so, like, there's just a wing of the bands that sound more like Marduk, right? And Antaeus were Frenchmen that sounded like Marduk. And it was Orthodox. And what it has in common with Antaeus is both have sort of disciplined but extremely high-intensity guitar playing, deliberate inorganicity, connections to industrial and stuff like that. I think Antaeus does it better in some places than others. But it was a wing of the scene. In terms of how it relates to Deiform, well, one thing that's interesting about Deiform that we can get on the table is that there is not in the way that would be familiar to people a unified riff style on it. There is not a kind of one of the set riff forms or moods that often dominates the narrower nowadays BM scene. If anything, it seems like an attempt to incorporate all the arsenal that was already on Maranatha, plus like a bunch of stuff beyond that, including sounds that have become more prominent in BM in general since then, which we'll get into. So it's kind of like a highly modern full spectrum BM record. And but what connects these riffing styles, what connects the various riff forms and the various sorts of harmonies that are being used and whatever, is a style of playing. And that style of playing is exactly the same, right? That sort of the jump 1-5 jumps. Basically, what's going on is a thing that you could call, it's the Marduk octave riffing thing, right? Where you're leaping between a root. There was a root and a fifth, but basically there's a kind of let's listen to my sample. Twilight of the Flesh is a good example of it. And so you'll hear this guitar style in a way that's maybe closest to the stuff from Maranatha that you just played. And, yeah, brings out something unique about the way this guy plays. had to fade it out on the big riff. So you can hear the similarity right there, right? That's built around the same sort of root fifth oscillation, right?
Yeah. What's interesting to me about the shape of that main riff is that it is structurally like a thrash riff.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah, you've got that big melodic opening, and then it kind of flattens out into like a simple 2-chord number where the vocals emerge, and then bursts back into the melodic riff. You know, the same kind of structure of maybe not necessarily Slayer, but maybe like Exodus or something like that. Something a little bit more primitive, you know, structurally. It's almost like a punk riff or like an early hardcore riff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So the cool thing about this, so what's happening here, right? This is the basic. I mean, I guess it was already in Funeral Mist, right? It was already in Maranatha, where it was presumably already to a degree influenced by Marduk. But this is sort of it's variations on this type of riff that is typified by Marduk, right? And it is, on the one hand, it's crypto thrash, right? It's built on pedal point. You're leaping between a root and another stable interval, like a fifth or an octave, and then playing around there. You know, boom, 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 ba-da-da-da, boom, 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 ba-da-da-da, boom, 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 ba-da-da-da, boom, 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 something like that, right? And then you just get, that two-chord alternation you're talking. Boom, boom, right? It's like thrash. So, what this guy's really in tune with, I think, is taking that kind of carrying that style in a few directions. On the one hand, in this song, he's carrying it back towards thrash, and he does that elsewhere on the record too. So on Apocalypticon, it has sick shredding like speed metal riff that isn't retro at all. If you listen to it, the intervals are like hideous black metal or death metal intervals being played at speeds that are shocking, right? And he's playing it not as a fancy hook lead, but there are no like quote unquote leads or hook riffs on their entire record. They're all attack riffs. Some of them are more catchy than others, right? We just faded out on a one that's more epic and elaborate, but there's nothing that's like a chorus. Maybe a couple moments that are big, but not like chorus riffs. So
this is not an album about big riffs. There are big riffs in it, but they're not centered around them.
Yeah. So what he's really doing is he's taking this kind of basic Marduk early Funeral Mist style and moving it in different directions. I mean, the other thing I love about this track is that in that part is the vocal attack on it, right? Those are the patterns are like thrash or punk vocals. You can tell he's intentionally written the lyrics to be percussive and aggressive as an overlay, which is something that most black metal bands, especially these days, miss, right?
Yeah, there's no concentration on vocals as a meaningful part of the music. They're just there to be there.
Yeah, I think especially, and something I've been thinking, right? I mean, here's a potential theory to put forward is that, like, you know, as much as it's good that we have variants of black metal that have nothing to do with thrash and variants of death metal that have nothing to do with thrash, like that 200 Stab Wounds had me thinking, it's like, honestly, there's, from certain kinds of aggressive down the line black or death metal, something's missing when you're not installing it in those thrash roots. And that is very much happening here. So, other big thing. We'll get back to that riffing style later because he's also taking that riff style, the octave drone thing, in a very different direction. The other thing, right, is how this is structured. So one thing that links this to the Orthodox tradition, right, is the common use of, kind of initiated the prominent use of interludes outside of the, 2-intro structure to a Bathory album, right? And the Gregorian chant stuff that starts this song is A, awesome, B, fully integrated with guitar. It's amazing how much just having continual high-power trem under it on one note changes it and blends it into the rest of the song. And the cool thing also is that it comes back at the end of the song, and instead of just being the same part, it is a different thing, this time with chords changing under it. And it's sort of like fulfilling stuff that was happening in the song. So the things that made a lot of ortho-BM kind of really annoying, right, the filler, or even a record like SMRC by Deathspell Omega, like, which has a bunch of fantastic riffs and songs on it, pretty annoying in some ways, is these sorts of big, long filler sections. Here, it's done meaningfully, and what he often does is he just puts the black metal song in the middle of a much more ambitious, kind of sprawling structure. And that's the thing that I like about the record in general, is that he's writing from bottom up and top down. Mm-hmm. You might know this better than me, right? Because you've worked on writing more albums than I have, right? But it seems like this is not written song by song. I think this record started as like 15 maybe exceptionally good riffs or sequences of riffs. And then he started trying to figure out, and then probably threw out hundreds of riffs that were like close but not quite. And then he started working in this monolithic top-down way like Ruins of Beverast, where he's like, where do I put these riffs in relation to each other? What parts of this kind of atmospheric or electronic textural stuff do I want related to what? How am I going to sequence the album as a whole? Sort of each song ends up centered on one or two specific riff structures, where it's like, this song's about this riff, that song's about that riff, that song's about that riff. And so it gives you the cool, it gives you the architectural feeling of a Ruins of Beverast record, where these massive blocks laid next to each other. But it also gives you the sort of, and that has a kind of coldness to it, right, in this modernist fracture. But you also have a way that these riffs just hurtle one into another in the way that they should on a classic riff-based black metal record.
Well, you know, it's a little bit hard to tell how this record was written. Based on listening to Salvation again, it was interesting because it's been so many years since I heard the very first Funeral Mist record. Something we always talk about on the show, the idea of sound objects as being important to songs in extreme metal, especially very like modern styles of extreme metal. Sound objects in Funeral Mist are based on samples. And there's a lot of songs on Salvation, even back in 2003, that are, in a sense, kind of structured based off of central samples that recur through the music. So I think there might be an element of song-by-song writing here, just because some of the songs on this record are so different from each other, and we got a great example with my first sample. So, Children of the Urn. I had a sense when I listened to this record that maybe it really opened up in the back end, but really I think it's more about getting your bearings as a listener. Like, going back to it, you know, on the second time I listened to it, it was like the first few songs made more sense to me. But this, on my initial listen, was the moment where, okay, I'm starting to get where this is coming from a little bit. There are no restrictions to this music. He can do whatever the fuck he wants. So, we're going to listen to the end couple minutes of Children of the Urn, and we're going to hear something that I'm unfamiliar with for Funeral Mist. Maybe it was on Hecatomb. I'll have to go back and listen, but at least from what I've heard from the band, he's never really done this before. Alright, black metal guy. You should be used to this rigmarole by now. Who am I going to relate this to? An essential black meets Viking metal band from the 90s into the 2000s that's very important that I always say no one appreciates the influence of.
Essential black Viking metal band from the late 2000s to the early 2000s. Well, late 90s to the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Wait. Dude, I'm going to feel stupid when you tell me.
Well, it's going to be Windier, man.
Oh, yeah, God, that is kind of like a Windier riff.
That's absolutely the kind of thing you'd hear off 1184 or something. Mm-hmm. That's one of those pet records of mine, or that band in general has been a pet band of mine that I say is always so much more important than people realize. Mm-hmm. That it's the Viking metal band that real black metal guys listen to, you know? Mm-hmm. And that, to me, is very much a Windier thing. You know, we have a tendency now to think of Windier as, it's kind of the start of, like, poppy Viking black metal, but I don't believe it was interpreted as such when they were contemporary. I think they were considered a lot more serious than a lot of people might see it now.
Well, I've said this after you. I've listened to some more through you and through those Haljoruna records, which are very Windier, and it is, in terms of codifying a certain idea of simplified epic folk melody, very influential. And also anticipates, like, the sort of stompy pagan black metal thing. I think it turns out that a lot of raw, stompy, kind of oi-influenced pagan BM actually sounds like Windier, right?
Yeah.
And that Windier actually sounded like oi, I think. Oi with keyboards.
That's probably the more compelling thing. Is Windier sounds like oi with keyboards, yeah, which it does.
Yeah, and however, the simplified folk melody, Windier has some stuff that's just like, here is your basic medieval sounding melody. There's other stuff that is elaborate and authentic and informed by Norwegian folk music, even if it's played on kooky synth patches.
Yeah, you can hear the Hades in it.
Yeah. Exactly. I was going to say, this is an extremely authentic folk melody. And it sounds like Hades. It has the elaborate cascading feeling you get in the realm of a Dying Sun. I always forget which Dying Sun record is which. I always confuse it with the Dead Can Dance record. Is it Dawn of a Dying Sun? I think
it's Dawn of a Dying Sun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what I was going to say was, so I haven't heard this on a Funeral Mist record before. I haven't heard that on Salvation or Marathana. Maybe it's on Hecatomb. Maybe not. But ultimately, what it says to me is, there aren't really any limits. This is a personal project. Whatever black metal is to this individual can be incorporated. And this is a different, very impactful moment on the record, but even as different as it sounds sonically, it doesn't feel not contiguous with the rest of it. The really aggressive, churning Marduk stuff that surrounds it in a lot of these tracks kind of makes sense. It's not so far out that it feels like a novelty. It feels like a person who grew up through all of these periods of black metal, putting these ideas together in a really logical way. And that's very interesting to me.
Yeah, so I think you're right about that. So this is the one that is the closest to what people now would recognize as that is a folk black metal riff or a pagan black metal riff, right? Just because of the intervals. However, it's a pervasive influence on this record, pagan BM. And a thing that happens a lot here is that you get kind of primordial folk melodic forms without the obvious note choices or general vibe, right? You can hear that even there, right? It's not like a generic, it's certainly not what a canned folk black riff sounds like now. But like more than that, I wanted to read this. So I think a band that's important for some of the NoEvDia people is Soren. And, it's a band where, where has that band's influence been? Well, it's been in things like the DSO, the DSO demo and shit like that. But one of the cool things these guys, one of the cool things DSO guy has done is reissue the Soren material for a long time. Mm-hmm. And this is some liner notesy stuff he wrote on their Instagram. It said, the core feature of their musical world is the inimitably bleak melodies they conjure up, occasionally hinting at folk music, but always performed in a frantic manner resembling the influence of a meter-long line of cocaine. Intense and fast, that is. Very fast, in fact. Yeah, so you hear that here. I mean, you hear that here, right? That description could apply to this record. Occasionally hinting at folk music, always performed in a manner resembling a meter-long line of cocaine, right? Soren would bend and warp these sort of folk melodies in ways that made them sound sort of ghastly and nocturnal, right? And you get a lot of stuff. That method of sort of bending folk melody in various directions happens on here, as does the kind of emphasis on a ripping, propulsive guitar style. You get it. I mean, there's a fucking. I mean, the song towards the end of Idet Glimmer and Morkets Dupe has what is it? Oh yeah, or actually, just the title track. Sorry, yeah, because Svart Lizard Tronin is a bonus. The title track to that record rhythmically works like the riff you just played. Mm-hmm. It has this sort of long, unfolding, way too many notes in it for normal form, and it has this heavy, downbeat, headbanging rhythm. There is another Swedish band. I think that connection is there. But one thing that Soren does is they tap into the sort of the droniness of folk, and that is something that I think is a huge presence on this record too. So I'll get to that more with my last sample, but we got to go to yours.
Well, speaking of droniness, let's talk about drone. Well, let's talk about the other side of drone, which is using it to bind together really aggressive, really kind of chaotic music. Which is something we also heard on the sample I played off Marathrana. The idea of, we've got this continuous looping guitar line that binds together over the top of everything else, these disparate sort of melodic ideas. Let's think of a different take on that with the final track on the album, Into Ashes. So, interesting note, I did not realize that it was a drum machine on this record until this last track. And you know me, I'm pretty good at spotting that.
I'm ridiculously bad at spotting drum machines, so I'm proud to say that I spotted it here too.
Oh yeah, when the 30-second note hi-hats kicked in on this track. But so this is a very we are, well, spoiler, we're both sampling off this track, which is, I think, the best song on the album.
Oh, absolutely. This is the monumental closer.
Yeah, this is huge. And I love, it was like I was saying earlier, it's like, is this a song, is this an album written track by track? Is there a greater idea? Maybe it's both, because there's something about this song, the way it seems to kind of like decay, the way the drum machine becomes obvious, the chaos becomes more consuming, the album kind of destroys itself at the end in a way that I found really compelling. So let's listen to the middle part of Into Ashes. So I think an interesting thing happens here. I think there was a deliberate effort on the part of this guy to pretend this was a real drummer for most of the album. Because, like I said, I'm pretty good at spotting drum machines. I don't care either way. You can do whatever you want. But there's a real effort to make all of this very human sounding for the rest of the record. I'm really interested in what, like, drum patches this guy used. Because, damn, these sound authentic. Especially in the slow parts. There's really crisp cymbals. Really nice sounds that sound very human. Very authentic. But then it all breaks down on this last song, Into Ashes. All the human stuff is removed, and it just becomes this horrible clatter, almost like a catharsis record or something. You know, just this explosion of noise, these hyper-speed 30-second note hi-hats against a really fast snare that are entirely impossible for a human to play.
They're highly syncopated hi-hats, too. They're doing the kind of syncopated embellishments that you would get in, well, if it was that fucking Fluids record coming from Trap, and if it's something else, it'd be coming from Breakcore, right?
Yeah.
These are like breakcore or crazy industrial techno hi-hats.
Yeah. And I thought that was really interesting because I get all the way at the end of the record, and then this, like, there's a reveal there. And I think that was intentional. You know, the idea is like, oh, I thought this was, like, maybe some session musicians, a group of people. No, it's just this one guy with a drum machine in his room, you know, which kind of reorients your whole view of the record, you know, and it kind of retroactively makes sense of some of the decisions, that this is an object of personal obsession, you know. I guess I'm getting kind of abstract here, but I like the idea of this elaborate fake-out, that this is a full band that funnels into this final song, and it's like, no, it's one guy obsessing over certain ideas. And then you get to the end of the album, and then you have to re-listen from the beginning. It's like reading a detective story in a novel, knowing who the killer is from the beginning. And, you know, it changes everything you read, going through it again. Yeah, you know what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I do. Yeah, I mean, speaking of murder, I mean, the other thing is obviously that is supposed to sound like a machine gun, right? Yeah. I mean, you can basically picture a kid with, you know, going like, you know,
because it's not, right? Like it's not always the same. He's constantly changing up the rhythms of the hi-hats and shit. It's like scattered staccato rhythms. It's wonderful.
And in terms of, I agree, it is wonderful, and it does a thing that we've been talking about this year and last year about how, you know, how do you successfully integrate the best of avant electronica into metal without compromising the metal, right? The cool thing is that under that, the blast is, I mean, once you realize that it's mechanized, you understand, oh yeah, that's why the drummer can play so fucking fast, right? But the blast remains iron steady under that. And it keeps skittering over it, right? The riffs hold. And in a lot of ways, I feel like this record achieves exactly what that plebeian grandstand record was trying to achieve, but in the complete opposite way. You know, like, how do you make something that has ridiculously fast drums? In their case, they were drums that sounded like they were programmed, maybe really triggered or whatever, right? But and has these breakcore rhythms in it and shit, and communicates sort of apocalypse and collapse and whatever. And, you know, they went for it big, right? And it sort of just it just sounded weak, right? This record is written very, very differently, but sort of evokes it is also highly atmospheric. It also has a ton of samples, you know, sprawling interludes. It also has this inhumanly fast playing and drum machine. And it also sounds really apocalyptic. It just does that while being just barreling riff-based black war metal, right?
Yeah.
So the other thing, speaking of the folk thing, right? You may have noticed that the riff there sounds like there's a riff in there that sounds like another one of my favorite bands. I'll just play the sample. Everyone will know. I'll just play the fucking sample, and then we'll talk about it after.
Alright, so you've been talking about Hate Forest for a long time, and you've been like, oh, you should check out Purity. I've checked out Purity, it's pretty cool. Why didn't you show me this one? This is it. Yeah, this is it. This is the Hate Forest record for me.
You know, I went back to it the other day, and I thought exactly the same thing.
Dude, this is fucking it, dude.
Yeah,
this is like, just that little clip is like, I'm going to, after I go to bed and work tomorrow, I'm going to listen to this album. This is Hate Forest for me. I get this completely.
You know, a lot of my listening at any given point is highly conditioned on, like, what shit I've got. Like, okay, this is just a confessional, but it's highly conditioned on what I've got on my computer at any given time, or, like, whatever. You know, like, to the most ancient ones, I listened to a lot when I was in college. And then, like, for whatever reason, I listened to Purity a lot later. Purity is the one that people say is the one. And the funny thing is, that record really is kind of hits hard in a specific mood. I went back to this the other day and I was like, these are all the riffs I remember.
I mean, this is just like, just tough Blazebirth Hall shit, you know?
Yeah. I mean, Purity has the Gates on it, which is like the big hit single, and that's because he he changes the bass note in a riff 3 times, which makes it sound enormous. But like this record, yeah, I think I agree with you that this is the Hate Forest record, and I think I was spreading misinformation. One thing that Purity does that's cool, that an old Metal Archives review pointed out, is that there's a single keyboard root note suspended the whole time. So it really emphasizes the drone effect. I mean, that's the whole Purity thing. Like, it's literally one note under it, right?
Yeah.
This record basically does that too, though. It's just on the guitars. And so this is the other direction that Marduk guitar implies. On the one hand, it is thrash pedal point. On the other hand, it's a kind of drone, because you're just leaping between the root and the octave, which are the same note, right? And this guy's guitar style, right, is just furiously fast, and it involves more ringing chords. When he's doing that, when he's letting the chords ring, like on this song, he is either ringing out the chords really high. This song still being Into Ashes, right? On Into Ashes, right, the Ariak is ringing the chords in this way that is very Hate Forest, and then when he just tears into this gigantic folk riff that works exactly like that. That was the riff to Inmost Winter on the most ancient ones. and it has the same sort of just storming, majestically unfolding, authentic folk form as that. It was already in Death Metal Guy's sample, but kind of buried in the middle. Later in the song, right, the sort of the skittering, the skittering snare continues, right, and then this theme comes to the fore, just like droning. I mean, in the Hate Force sample, right, in Most Winter, that riff like repeats way after the sample ended, right. The whole thing at Hate Force just keeps going. Into Ashes just sort of, it doesn't end on this riff, but the song just it's meant to go to this riff for a long time. So listen to it here, and listen to the way it's being played as a round. At this point in the song, there are two guitars. They're starting the riff at different points, and you can follow the wave of the riff, and you can hear like you can almost see two different waveforms interlocking. It is just, it's gorgeous. Yeah, so that's sick.
All right, we are back with our last record of the night. Kind of a surprise release, not to the same degree as the Funeral Mist record that we just covered, but something that came out a couple weeks ago, and I had no clue about, is the new Pantheist record, titled Closer to God, out on Melancholic Realm Productions, which is basically a personal imprint of Pantheist and some associated projects. Just real quick, I assume you probably don't have any familiarity with Pantheist before this?
Heard the name for a long time, but no. Yeah.
Okay, so Pantheist is a pretty long-running funeral doom band, really only relevant to the funeral doom scene, which is kind of interesting, and we'll probably talk about that, because I think that Pantheist's real roots musically are kind of outside of funeral doom in a lot of ways. But a little bit of background for people who aren't familiar. So the first Pantheist demo came out in 2001, so they've been around for about 20 years now. To describe Pantheist, some of their early work is considered in the funeral doom scene like, kind of second-tier classic. The first album, O Solitude, is considered like a pretty big hit in funeral doom, as big a hit as we get in that style. My personal favorite is Amartia, the second record. I think that is basically a classic album. Very experimental, very different, especially for 2005. Wonderful record, highly recommended to anyone with interest in funeral doom. Beyond that, Pantheist started experimenting more and more. Journey Through Lands Unknown in 2008, not a tremendous fan of, but I get what they're going for. The self-titled record in 2011, they really lean into the progressive and experimental ideas. I do like that one. And Seeking Infinity in 2018, I actually haven't heard. I'm going to have to go back to that. But here we are in 2021 with Closer to God. I guess my thesis about this record is that Pantheist is an interesting band. I feel like after their first couple records, going back to it, you can almost hear it back then, but especially on their most recent work, it's clear that the heart of Pantheist lies in prog rock. I think that Pantheist is a funeral doom band that sees funeral doom as a structural form rather than a genre, if that makes sense. It's about extremely slow tempos, about winding, almost ambient song structures, but within that form...
Lush orchestration, right, because otherwise it could be like Khanate or something,
Yeah. But within that paradigm, you can basically tuck whatever melodic ideas you want, whatever thematic ideas you want. You can do whatever you want with it. The first couple Pantheist records are distinctly funeral doom in the manner of maybe Skepticism circa Pharmakon or Lead and Aether. But then they really split off. They start adding more and more of these kind of prog and electronic and experimental elements, making them kind of a unique figure in the funeral doom scene that has persisted and has had kind of a unique audience the whole way through. So with that background done, I actually thought, and I wrote in the notes, that the black metal guy would hate this. I thought this would be totally unbearable for him, but I'm starting to realize as we do the show more and more, the things that I think that you'll hate tend to be all right for you, and it's things that I expect will just blow past you that you actually hate. So, what's your impression of Closer to God?
Well, I don't hate it. It's definitely not my thing. Obviously, right? Something that is like prog rock but really slow. Not up my alley. I certainly hear the prog connection. I think there's something... I understand why you would connect this form to Prague, right? First of all, right? Because of the big scale, elaborate orchestration, right? Before skepticism, who else would put a literal pipe organ in your band, right? Like a prog rock band.
Yeah.
And I understand the idea that given this massive canvas with minimal metal restrictions to worry about, right? You want to fill in all that space in this kind of more exploratory, wandering, noodly, proggy way. I find certain passages on this unconditionally objectionable. However, relative to the length of the whole, I can't really hold them against the album as a whole, right? Things have their eccentricities. I can't say, that I can't write it off because of that. The emotional spectrum here is interesting. This is certainly indulging in some melancholy in a way that I often find less than ideal. That is, it is not doing something right, I tend to dislike music that encourages us to hang around in moods that are, I don't know, let's see, wimpy, or moods that are sort of, not, the Nietzsche way of putting it would be, right, like, is this conducive to life, right? And, there's music that can be extremely negative and depressing that in some ways nevertheless is, right? Promoting of life, or does give you some profound insight, right, into the nature of things or whatever. And there can certainly be music that's profoundly ugly that does that as well, right? But, you do, there's a certain kind of downcast, melancholy mood that isn't, not the full-on tragic or sorrowful or mournful, right? That I just dislike. But this is, I think this is not, I find the mood here, at least on a lot of this record, more plausible and worthwhile than I think might be likely. What I'd compare it with is, right, I really hated that Bell Witch record. I can't remember what...
Yeah. The one that was like the collaboration with Aerial Ruin. Right?
Yes, it was both.
We both hated that, yeah.
Yeah, it was proggy, and it was indulgent, and it was melancholy, and it was just kind of like, here's my sad little melody. And it was so, like, it was personal in a really objectionable way to me. Like, it was subjective, individual, biographical. It was like singer-songwriter music or rock. It was not like metal. Here the melancholy is less personal. It feels more social. I admit I was influenced somewhat by the liner notes, or whatever's written. There's some just earnest stuff that I assume is written by the band that's been posted under the YouTube link. A lengthy and joyless lockdown, the ghost of Ennio Morricone, the soundtrack of video games endlessly played, an unfulfilled need for connection, an acute awareness of the futility of it all. These are some of the ingredients that have led to the creation of Closer to God. Inspired by strange moods during the pandemic lockdown, blah, 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 blah. It seems like it's written about the, alienation, and this guy's from Europe. I think he's from the Netherlands now, right? His name is Greek, but... Originally
from Belgium, then moved to the UK for this band.
Okay, well, I was sort of accurate.
You got between the two.
Yeah. There was a low country in there. Yeah, well, so if he was in the UK, he was certainly locked the fuck down. Where I live was through its milder version of that. You didn't really have to go through that in the same way, but
I'm in the South. Nothing happened down here.
Yes. You're surrounded by reasonable people, or governed by reasonable people. Well, I don't know if I could say that, to be honest, but you know what I mean.
We're still figuring it out.
It's right. There is but like this guy, he's in a place that is very shut down, right? By American standards, almost inconceivable. And, that feeling of alienation is real. I live in I literally live in a basement. And being stuck in a space like that in a time when not much else is going on is deeply affecting in a way. And so maybe having gone through it makes it resonate with me more personally in a way that biases me toward it. But like, that kind of melancholy is something I get, and it gets at something that is like, in targeting that individual feeling or affect, it's also targeting a social phenomenon, something that people have experienced worldwide, and kind of this deeper feeling of just being out of tune with things, right? And it is at times listless and self-pitying. Right? And that's not a good way to feel, and music shouldn't encourage you to feel that way, but it is very faithful to the phenomenon. I certainly felt listless and self-pitying way more than I would like during that time. Right?
Yeah.
And, I recognize that successfully imitating a bad emotion doesn't make something good, right? That would be my complaint about a lot of, certain kinds of extreme DSBM that you might like more than I do. But like, but basically that's a rambly way of saying, I think I get it basically, and let's talk about it more and see where it goes.
I think I basically agree with you. Actually, like the Funeral Mist, I decided to go back and listen to O Solitude, just because it's been a while since I listened to Pantheist. Wanted to compare it to the first record they did. And it's amazing how much melodically lines up between the first record and the newest one. And then I started to realize, listening to Amarsha, listening to Journey to Lands Unknown, Pantheist is really kind of a razor focused on certain intervals, certain melodic ideas they keep revisiting over and over again. Which is why I talk about how, for Pantheist, Funeral Doom appears to be a structural conceit for them. They like it slow and low. They like the idea of developing emotion within this, kind of subdued setting, so to speak. And I think that there's something else they said on the Bandcamp page in describing this record, which was that it began with the idea of doing a single lengthy track in the vein of Skepticism's A's, their kind of famous, single 25-minute song EP that they did, I think, right after Lead and Aether, something like that, before Pharmacon. Great song, legendary Funeral Doom shit. Everybody listen to it now. So, I kind of echo your sentiment. This is not my thing. My interest in Funeral Doom is not this sort of thing. However, I think it's kind of cool to listen to a prog take on Funeral Doom. That's not an idea that's been worked around a whole lot. I think that there's a lot of kind of nifty musical ideas in this. It's just not speaking to me on an aesthetic level. But I can, I've listened to enough music and talked about it enough that I can kind of divide that from my personal taste. I think this is very good for what it is. And I think it's going to be a really big deal to a certain kind of listener that's not me. That being said, let's talk about probably what I assume is the origin of this record, which is the big monolithic song at the beginning.
Yeah. We got to get to samples. I was going to say we both talked. So I talked a long time. You talked. Well, you know what? The lead-in fits the record, right?
The lead-in fits the record.
We've
Exactly.
just self-indulgently elaborated for like 15 minutes. So, all right, first sample, bud. I was thinking we should listen to yours because it's more representative of the record. Like, it has the funeral doom in it. It's more doomy.
Okay, I can do that. So let's go to a little bit later in Strange Times, and this is probably you would say it's pretty representative of the album as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let's go to about the middle of Strange Times after one of the interludes, and yeah, it's pretty tight actually. Let's go. It's interesting listening to this again, with the idea in mind that this is designed based on a sort of paradigm laid out by skepticism, just how similar it is structurally to skepticism around A's and Pharmacon and the related EPs. The idea of dropping out the rhythm guitars to create a sort of elevated breakdown structure. I don't know what you would call it, allowing the heavy bass tones to drop back in for the verse, but removing them during these more poignant, delicate moments, which is a very prog technique which is not alien to skepticism itself. I guess the difference is, obviously, it's on a completely different emotional wavelength from skepticism, but structurally I understand the similarity. A lot of this record, as you will get to, is based off of really a single kind of intervallic idea, melodically, which is kind of a strength and a weakness of this record. I like the consistency of it, but it can kind of blow past you if you're not concentrating on the details of the lead guitar and the synths and stuff like that.
Well, it's definitely supposed to be immersive. He's clearly not going for, like, Skepticism something like Skepticism or Thurgathon, each riff is marked, right? They're all for paying attention to. Here, he's almost like, it's really about that kind of immersive, floating, wandering thing, right? Which is why you can't really hold it against him. Like, that's it's the mood he's exploring.
Yeah, it's like, you can never accuse this band of not executing on the idea.
Yeah.
It's like, you may not be that interested in the idea they're executing, but clearly they're very good at accomplishing what they're going for.
Did you already say well, this actually connects to my sample, right? But did you already say what you're going to say about this sort of interval repeating, the kind of basic similar intervals that run throughout the whole thing?
There's basically a single chord structure that forms the core of this entire record. Most of this record is all about vamping and, improvising around that chord structure. It's a very simple, 1-4-7-4 kind of thing.
I knew it was a 1-4 thing, but you mapped it out. That's good.
Or actually, 1-5-7-5. It might be, because the two-step drop is very important to Pantheist. That is something that extends through all of their records with remarkable consistency. In a certain way, you could say that every Pantheist record is based around the same general melodic idea, but it's mostly an experiment in textures and lead melodies around that basic chord frame.
All right. Well, so let's listen to where that idea is taking shape. The beginning of Strange Times. So this is about 2 minutes and 35 seconds in. Seconds is the word I was looking for. And you're going to start out with a nice lyrical nod to H.P. Lovecraft and or Solstice.
We live in a new dark age. These times are strange. One day, the future right away. The very next day, it's bursting in flames.
So I think it is a 1-4, right? Duh, duh, duh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a
it just has that kind of
4 kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Duh, duh, yeah. It's got that sort of bleakly open major key thing, right? And you could hear the first line of the record is "We live in a new dark age," which is it's at the beginning. That line comes at the end of the intro speech on Solstice's New Dark Age, and I believe it is part of a Lovecraft quotation that is better known for the beginning of it, something like the inability of the mind to correlate all its contents. So that's cool. And, the lyrics there kind of set the tone that, okay, this is dealing with this kind of indeterminate crisis space that we're in right now. Endlessly sprawling crisis. What it really sounds like to me is fucking Death in June. This part, and parts like this that recur throughout the record. I could do a sample comparison, but this show is already extremely long. I was trying to hunt for the exact thing, and it was hard because there are so many songs that have certain kinds of lush, weirdly chorded major key, very simple major key progressions like this. Jerusalem the Black would be one. Daedalus Rising would be one. Or more than that. Those are a couple. Or This Is Not Paradise also. They just all this kind of vibe. However, I wonder, so that could be a direct influence. It would certainly make sense for music that moves at this kind of tempo and with this kind of interest in immersive atmosphere. And like, I don't know, like the dude from, there is a crosstalk between these scenes. The dude from Saturnus went on to become the dude in Of the Wand and the Moon, which is now one of the most prominent neo-folk bands. And he actually just released a record that has this kind of moody prog feel the whole way through. This record actually kind of reminds me of the new Of the Wand and the Moon, although that is way more singer-songwritery. However, it could be a thing of just totally parallel evolution, because this guy's really influenced by Ennio Morricone, who's also a huge influence on Death in June from the very beginning. Just their sense of what a kind of epic, old-school melody, a certain cinematic melody sounds like, right? So it might just be, okay, you take Ennio Morricone and you add slow tempos, lush synths, and what, kind of metaphysical political lyrics, and you get this. But the atmosphere has this kind of outside looking in or casually inhabiting a nonsense world vibe. And that's a lot like Script of the Bridge by the Chameleons. I think at its best, this record has that mood. It's not really indulgent, it's just profoundly alienated. And you're kind of swimming around in this state of anomie and detached, right? And maybe
that would be comparable to some of the most like weird, alienated, like Rush stuff. So,
yeah. I could see that. Yeah. So exactly. So in that sample, and I think in the one you have, you can get that kind of like, it's this kind of bleak major key, almost pop progression, and it's being sort of turned. It's like a pop progression being turned against itself in this weird way, and it makes sense to me. I've inhabited that mood. Even like the cover art is like very DIY and awesome. It's like the dude put himself
like bad awesome. Yeah,
deliberately bad awesome. It's like if that oh God, what was that terrible shit, Sacred Son or whatever, right? That was a gimmick, right?
Sacred Son isn't bad. It's pretty good.
Well, I know that the music is basically like competent down the line one-man black metal. But like
it's like competent mayhem worship shit. Yeah.
Yeah, but the cover is silly. But this is like attempting to do that, but in a serious way. Like he's in the cover, and it is him.
And he's wearing his own shirt.
Yes.
Fuck.
And he's looking out on like the some sort of. It's not the White Cliffs of Dover. Maybe it is the White Cliffs of Dover if he's in the UK now. Just sprawling coastline, and he's photoshopped in the Milky Way over it. And he's also but he's looking out at nature through a painting of it, which also has him in it.
Well, so it's a perpetual mirror of himself against the background, man.
Yeah, it's far
worlds
out.
Within worlds, bro.
If you look at it too long, you'll trip out. It's basically a pretty good idea of like, looking at reality through a screen, and the screen is on your computer, which the lockdowns have put you around all the fucking time, right? You wake up and it's glowing like a shrine in front of you.
Your connection to the outside world, right? Yeah.
Yes, the screen has also... Yes, it's supposedly your connection to the outside world, and yet it's severing you from it. And when you go outside, there's also a screen between you and the outside world, because you are, in many ways, prevented from interacting with people. So that is, that's pretty cool and pretty smart. And, it's weird, right? Situations
I didn't
like
think
that.
of it in those terms. It's like, oh, well, when I think about it within the context of the whole kind of like COVID album thing, okay, it's a lot cooler. I get that now. Yeah.
Yeah, and or then there's another thing where you end up looking more towards nature, which is, cool, but at the same time, in this way that, you can end up, I think, he's feeling disconnected from the vastness of nature too, right? That's not really how it was for me, but I get it. I get it. And he's got, even the comments, right? There's one comment under this video. It's been up for 13 days. There's a single comment. And the single comment is, the third seal is open. Pun that I can't read because of YouTube, but it's something like Necronomicon, but with the name of the current concern. And feel scaring often, closer to God. It's just like an English cry for help from the middle of the internet. And somehow that's I think that comment helped me understand this more.
Ah, okay, I get that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about your sample. Or wait, are we going to mine too? We're going to go to yours at the end, so let's go to my next one. All right.
Yeah.
So in terms of stuff on this record that I cannot allow to pass unchallenged, we've got to go to Wilderness. This is a... So obviously, Wilderness is an interesting title because you can take refuge from, if you're socially isolated, you can take refuge in the wilderness. Although in the UK, apparently they were trying to prevent you from even doing that for a long time.
Yeah.
But, you can at least, in principle, attempt to take refuge in the wilderness. But wilderness can also refer to the social world around you. Dislocation, disorientation, and a sense that the ground around you is not fertile. This starts out unforgivable, but kind of gets cool.
For a moment we can breathe, a sigh of relief, that among the pure waters our suffering has ceased. You act like you always have known that the bliss will soon be over. The end I see hidden in your eyes. Your sadness kills me, lover.
So, I guess when I said the first part of the sample was unforgivable, I guess not necessarily the lead-up. I sampled more of the lead-up than I meant to. But that's the kind of theme, a major theme for the last part of the record on Wilderness and of Stardust. That sort of... I can't hum it because if I do, I'll accidentally hum the Rohan theme from Lord of the Rings, which is very similar but in a different key. And
Yeah.
It's not in any way remotely the Rohan theme, but because the Rohan theme is echoing through the deepest chasms and ravines of my mind at all times. Etc. So basically with that sample, right, he's got the basic theme there, and then it goes into prog rock piano land. You know, my problem with this stuff is always that it just sounds like musical theater. That's not a genre I appreciate. It is... I mean, and it also points out, doing it that way also kind of brings to light how much these melodies relate to stuff like Tears for Fears or whatever. Like, if it's like Chameleons on the one hand, it's also like, all the people, the people. And, you know, like, he would probably agree to that. He'd probably be like, yeah, that's kind of the feeling I was going for. I mean, that song is about intense alienation, and it's a good song, right? But, you know, this is sort of without any of the kind of catchy sad boy new wave stuff. It just, I don't know. Like, I do not understand placing that on a metal record. However...
Yeah, I get that.
What? Yeah, I mean, it's just...
Well, however... I think that, like, the idea is, like I said at the beginning, like, Funeral Doom as a form.
No,
you know?
I get that, but, you know, prog rock content, okay, but I hate prog rock. Like, I mean, I know you have more time for prog than I do, right? You like Queen, I don't. Right? And this is because I'm a short...
Yeah. You are a short hair. Yeah.
But at the end of the... What?
I'm balder than you, and yet you are the short hair, culturally.
Yes. But at the end, right, even the piano stuff gets better towards the end of it. There's a sort of a chord change or something. And then it drops into this just big, chunky, like, groove, and the growls come in. And that, to me, is like... That's like a catatonia kind of thing. It's like...
oh, yeah, definitely.
It's like you get the growliness and the droniness of like the old Catatonia and October Tide stuff, and then you also get like the sort of
dick swinging rock and roll shit.
Exactly.
Catatonia.
Exactly. That's indulgent in a cool way. I like that a lot. I wish there were more of it. And using Funeral Doom creatively to do shit like that, I really like. Like, yeah, in the middle of this sprawling structure, why not throw in some goth death doom parts or whatever, right?
Oh no, that was an interesting thing I heard when listening to O Solitude earlier today, which was like, oh, this is a funeral doom record, and a couple of the songs have blast beats on them.
Oh, that's
and,
cool.
Like thrash beats. I think the primary influence for that kind of thing was like disembowelment, but it was like, oh well, why should the tempo limit the form? It's just a very fast blast beat in terms of like note division, but it's still at the same tempo, so why not?
Yeah. So that's inventive and cool. I'm gonna have to go back and listen to that record. That sounds good, but that's inventive and cool. And it also brings to mind another thing, which is, at least until the piano part, a thing I said to myself before the piano part was, hey, say what I will about some of the proggy parts. Like, there was a sort of flowery guitar solo earlier on the record. Say what I will about the proggy parts. You got to give credit where credit is due. He's doing growls the entire time. Right? A thing that was bad about the Bell Witch was there were these sad little clean vocals. And unfortunately, we do get that on this sample. But when it lights back in, you're like, this guy has great growls. And he does that for almost... And I think one reason I like this record better than you might have thought I would, or than maybe it sounds like I do based on some of the things I've said about it, is that it remains generically funeral doom through most of it. Like, you can hear the growls, you can hear the heft. There are even some more aggressive doomy riffs here and there.
Yeah, I definitely get that. But speaking of solos that you may or may not like, we got to get to the last track. Of Stardust we are made, and to dust we shall return. Which is a song that is a setup for a series of solos that are pretty fucking cool, actually. Bro, COVID really sucked, didn't it?
Yeah, man. It's
over.
Depending
now,
on where
right?
you live, it's yeah. I was gonna say, yeah, right. It's totally over.